And don't forget to check out howtocollectcards.com, a website I created dedicated to helping collectors of all skill levels build their collections. Feeling like you just don't know where to begin, you don't know what all these different things mean within the hobby, I've created this dictionary and I'm giving it away completely free. It has over 120 terms, all the terms that you need to know to get started collecting cards. We're also offering an advanced training course that is comprised of 17 different parts, everything from learning what cards you should be focused on buying for yourself, what cards are worth, where to buy the cards, when to buy cards to save yourself the most money, how to avoid different mistakes within the hobby that a lot of people make. It's just got everything that you need to be successful collecting cards, so please check that out. We've also got a bunch of new bonus content, and any new content that I create for the training course gets added for free. So if you've bought the course already, you're going to get all that new content, and it's free for life. I'm going to keep adding stuff to it. There's always going to be new content helping everyone. So please check it out. It's really extensive. It's got tons of great information. I think it's going to bring a lot of value to a lot of people. Hey everyone, this is Josh back with Cardboard Chronicles. Today I'm joined by Chase. How's it going, man?
How you doing, Josh?
Hey Chase, why don't you start us off and tell us about yourself and your background in the hobby?
Yeah, sure. First of all, big fan of the show. I've been watching it for a long time. I think it's awesome what you're doing for the hobby. I want to put that out there that anything that brings attention and helps kind of spread knowledge about this hobby, it helps all of us. And just from a learning perspective, and also just getting more people interested into it and bringing kind of what this whole thing is all about and the fun it can be to more people. But I recently just got back in the hobby, maybe like a year and a half ago. It was kind of feeling like it was something that was kind of pulling at me for a while. It was something I did as a kid, like a lot of guys, and I just kind of wanted to revisit it. There's a lot of things in my career where I was not really feeling as much passion as before, and I wanted to go do something that kind of brought me back to being a kid again, and something else where I could kind of use my business savvy and my ability to kind of identify things and like I've done in real estate or like in my business and apply it to this at this age. So kind of brought me back into it. And some of the stuff that I always wanted to own. Of course, I started there and kind of going after that, and then just kind of snowballed from there.
I really like the call out you had about connecting your current like adult skills to your childhood passions. It's kind of an interesting way to think about that. I never thought about that way.
Yeah, I think that trading sports cards as a kid was the first time that we, or like myself, was able to sort of make choices and try to pick things that we thought were smart buys, and then watch and see how those players developed or how that particular card that we chose of that player was that the right one. And we'd see those little tickers in the Beckett right the next month, and we'd get to know it's an uptick. We were right about that, or and it was a way for you to start understanding how a market works. And then another thing about it was just the negotiation part, right? Like, going to friends and trying to do trades and or going into a shop and trying to figure out, and you start to realize that, just because you have something of value doesn't mean you're going to get value for it unless you fight for that, right? And I remember the first time that I got sort of taken for a ride, as a kid. I remember it was at a Houston show, and it was at the George R. Brown convention, and it was this big show that we have here every year, the TriStar show. And I went with a big Jordan collection. I mean, just tons of amazing inserts. And I wanted to get into some of these younger players because I was a Jordan guy, and I wanted the Garnetts and the Kobe's and some of the Iversons and the Refractors. And I kind of wanted to consolidate into what those were the hot cards at the time. Some of the penny stuff that, that you love, the Refractors, the good stuff. And this is prior to, even grading being as popular as it is. And a lot of people, everything was raw. But yeah, so I remember kind of getting taken for a big ride, and I remember what that felt like. As a kid, I was probably 13 or something, and just because I had built a good collection didn't mean that I got value for that collection. And it just always kind of stuck in my mind. And in business later on down the line, I remembered that. I remember that feeling of getting value for what you have, and that's something that it teaches you. And there's all kinds of great lessons that came from just trading sports cards. And but the main thing is that above all that stuff, the business stuff, is just that the passion that you have for the sport for the players and the talk, right? The camaraderie that you have in those card shops back in the 90s, at those shows with friends, debating, who the best is, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a love there, for the interaction that the cards are a catalyst, for us to make friendships, to get together. Coming back in this hobby, I reminded me of that because I've made so many close friendships, guys I talk to almost every week, and most of it is, yeah, we talk the hobby, but we talk about all kinds of stuff, and the hobby is what brings us together. And I don't know that other collectible markets like art or coins, I'm not sure that happens there. You know, we talk about sports cards and we compare them to other collectible markets, and that's one of the things about it that I love. And when you look at the size of the sports card market, it's about, I don't know, it's in the hundreds of millions. Like, I don't remember the exact thing. It's maybe 400 million. I think the coin market's about 3.3 billion. I think the art market's 60 billion. So when I look at our generation and I think to myself, where would we want to line up? And I see how small this space is and how much it has to offer from all of these intangible benefits, that that I think that that are just aside from it being a commodity or some type of store of money or value. And that's something I don't necessarily know that you get as much from those other those other those other hobbies. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I mean, I've played around in them and I didn't experience that. So I definitely think that it's been interesting to come back as an adult, but a lot of the same things that I enjoyed as a kid, they're still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're really doing a good job of like wrapping up into a bow, kind of like what we all love about the hobby. And it's always hard to explain, right? Because like you said, it's like this intangible extra
Right.
juice that you get from it, aside from like, the money side or looking at the
Yeah.
cards. It's kind of all of it, right? It's a little bit of a little
Yeah.
bit of everything.
Absolutely. I mean, when I buy cards, when I first came back in, me personally, I wanted to own the stuff that I always dreamed of owning as a kid. And because I wanted to feel what that was like. And those cards, they meant something to me. When I remember going to those sports card shops, I remember seeing that Jordan rookie, right, just sitting in the case. It seemed unobtainable, as a kid. And I remember it wasn't just the card or the fact that it was an expensive card. It was the image on the card, him flying through the air, like the tongue out, the short shorts. I mean, it was a little bit before my time even, right? But it seemed like such a holy grail of a card. And I just remember, I remember one, I think on Beckett, they did an anniversary issue and they put it on the cover. I think they put the rookie card on the cover. And I remember, always looking at that card and wanting it. So that was like the first thing that I wanted to own when I came back into the hobby. But then, there was other cards too. Like once I got into my teenage years, the hot card at that time was the Kobe, the Topps Chrome, and everybody was trying to pull that card. I remember I pulled a base card and all my friends were freaking out, right? Like they were like, wow, let's see the Kobe. And the refractor just seemed like unobtainable. And even back then, those packs, I don't remember, I want to say they were like 20, $25 back in 96. I mean, $25 for a pack and you got 4 cards in there. At the time, it seemed astronomical, right?
Yeah.
It seemed crazy. And I just remember that, how difficult that card was to pull and the price of the packs back then. This is what, we're talking, 20, 25, 30 years ago. I mean, some of the stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think, it's just interesting to go back and try and own those things that you always wanted to own and enjoy them, and it brings you back. I think it brings you back to your childhood, looking at that stuff. It feels like almost like a time machine a lot of times,
Yeah.
for me, which a lot of people outside like my girlfriend or people, like, they don't understand that, right? Like they don't get that, those parts of it. But, I think that when I look at buying cards, for me, and again, I'm coming from outside the hobby and a lot of people disagree with me that are much more experienced, but, I look for 3 things when I buy a card. One, I look for, how obviously the player, right? How important the player is to me and also in history and where I feel like they fall in. I think obviously that's where you start. And then I look at, the actual card and the issue of the card and how important that card is in the hobby and in terms of, in terms of rarity, in terms of how iconic that card may be, and the importance of that issue, that set. And then, of course, the population, the eye appeal, all the things that would make it even more rare. And then, I obviously, I look at, what, where I feel like, that card sits in terms of, the value and the appreciation that card would have, like, long term. And I mean, all those things kind of factor in, when I buy it. But yeah, I mean, I kind of try to use my own best judgment, but again, I think that you got to collect what you love too. At the end of the day, I mean, you can at the end of the day, you have to own the cards, right? So, I try to do that.
So why don't you give our audience a taste kind of what you do own? You're kind of teasing us a little bit, so I think people want to know, like, what are you buying? What cards do you have? You've only been back a year and a half, so I think you have an interesting perspective, especially coming from the business world, that people would be interested to know, like, what exactly are you buying and what
Sure.
hits all those notes for you?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the one I talked about already. So I've got a lot of Jordans. This is a 10 right here, and so the thing about the 10 is interesting. I first came back in the hobby. It had been growing, steadily. I think it was around the 20K range or something like that, or mid 20s, early 20s, and I think now it's going as high as 50 in that range. But the interesting thing about the 10 is that the pop on it, you could say at the time was like 300, and I think, or in the high twos. And I think a lot of people think, well, it has a high pop, but because the card, the population on the 10 varies so much in terms of the quality. Like I've seen a lot of 10s that, in my opinion, when you see them, to me, it's skeptical whether or not I think that that's really, a 10. I've seen a lot of 10s that seem off-center to me, a lot of 10s with print dots. To me, like when I was looking for a 10, when I came in, I wanted it to be, pretty much close to perfect. I wanted the centering to be perfect. I wanted it to be no print dots. I wanted corners, edges, everything to be to par. And so to find that was actually hard. I mean, I think I looked at 5 or 6 10s, probably like 4 or 5 in person before I actually, bought the first one. And, I think that that's interesting because within that population, there's a spectrum, and, that spectrum tends to be a little bit, it tends to be a little bit wider than you would think. And so to find a nice 10, I feel like is challenging. And so I was trying to do that when I bought that card. And I think that, to me, when I look at a population of whatever it is in the high twos or 300, I think it's very low, because you're not talking about just the most popular player, basketball player of all time, or the greatest basketball player. You're at one time, Michael Jordan was the most popular person on planet Earth. I mean, on planet Earth. I mean, that's where the polls, they did global polls. I mean, he was the most popular person on planet Earth. I want to put that in perspective. He's way beyond like a Mickey Mantle or, a guy like that, because he's a global phenomenon and his brand lives on forever. I mean, he's not comparable. So a population of 300 to me is nothing when you look at what Jordan did to our entire culture, and so, people can say all day long, they can debate about the card, and they can say, oh, well, there's so many of them, whatever. There's not very many 10s. 300 is nothing. And so I think the card is extremely undervalued. I think long term, it's going to be a big card, and that's my personal opinion. And so, I'm always looking to buy good copies of that card. I mean, I've got a bunch of Jordans. I mean, this is a 9 here, but I've got probably 6 9s. I don't have access to everything today because of the Corona stuff. There's some stuff at my office, but that I don't have. But basically, I'm a big believer in that card for those reasons I mentioned before. It's an iconic set. So the 86-87 Fleer set, to me, it is the first and most iconic set in all of basketball. I mean, there was other sets prior to that, and there's other great cards. But to me, that set is the most iconic, in basketball history. And I own a lot of stuff from that set. So I got a bunch of Elijah ones. I'm a big believer. I know the Gary V stuff about Elijah one and stuff, but I've been buying this card. I didn't even know he said that. at the time. Here's 2 10s here. I've probably got 15 Elijah 10s. I think this is probably the most undervalued card, in my opinion. I mean, this should be a $5,000 card. And you look at the population of it. I mean, and how great Elijah was. I mean, Elijah was a guy, I'm not from Houston, but he's a guy that, you know, if you ask Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or LeBron James, who are the top 5, top 10 greatest players, he's going to be in their list. I mean, this is a guy that they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to come train with in Houston. I mean, you can see the videos like on YouTube, right, of like Elijah and Kobe, playing with Kobe and playing with LeBron and playing with all these great players. I mean, they paid money to come here and work with him just because of the respect that these guys have for him. And they're not doing that with Karl Malone or Patrick Ewing or any of these other guys whose cards, frankly, are worth more than a lot. I mean, Karl Malone's rookie, I think, I don't know if it's still trading for more than the Elijah but the point is that, you know, I think that he's an extremely undervalued guy, all-time blocks leader, you know, 2-time champion, amazing person, and just, to me, he's on my top 5. If I'm starting a top 5 team of all time, and he's my center, I mean, in my opinion, I put him up against anybody. So I just think that it's kind of a shame that he doesn't get the respect in the hobby. But I think that in due time, I mean, I think that his stuff, and it has gone up. I mean, I started buying those 10s when they were $500, and I bought 10, probably, I don't know, at that time. I don't know how many I have now. So many, I can't even, I don't know. But I was buying probably 5 or 10 of them back then when they were 500. I was buying them at 700. I mean, I think now they're at 12 or 1500. So, I mean, they are starting to catch up. But I thought that was an undervalued card in the set. Again, because very iconic set and extremely iconic player. So,
I make another point about the Pop 300 that people always poke at. The other thing to think about with that is that, I mean, I'm kind of going to ignore the 84 star for a second, but he only has one rookie card. Whereas these current guys have thousands and thousands and thousands of different copies. So if you think about it in terms of like just that one card, there's only 300 PSA 10 rookies, not just of that card, all rookies.
Absolutely. And you look at a guy like LeBron, like we mentioned, there's an Ultimate, there's an SP, there's Exquisite, there's Topps Chrome Black and Golds. And I mean, you know, how many people want to spend $100,000 on a LeBron James rookie that are out there? I mean, I don't know. You know, I don't know. But I can promise you there's less options in Jordan's rookie year, you know, to spend big money on cards because there just isn't that many options, to your point, right? You have to look at the total population for a player and big cards, right? And the dollar amounts and what that is. And for Jordan and Kobe, it's very small. There's just not a lot of stuff you can buy from their rookie year. And we look back at the history of the hobby and what matters, right? What really matters is the first issue of a player, right? I mean, first true issue of a player tends to be the card that people consider the stock, right? Like a Mickey Mantle rookie or, you know, the Honus Wagner or whatever it is. Like you're buying that stock and that player because that's their first issue. It's like their IPO, right? Kind of, so to speak. And so I think that like, I think that's it's interesting to me when I see these Luka cards and stuff and stuff going for more than something is. I mean, you know how difficult it is to pull like this card, for example. Like this is a 9.5, 10.10 Kobe Bryant Topps Chrome rookie, right?
Angle it the other way. Sorry, angle it the other way. Like there you go.
Yeah, so this card right here has absolute perfect color, zero greening at all whatsoever in this card. It's one of the reasons why I bought it. Now, to pull this card out of a box of Topps Chrome, even back in '96 when I was mentioning these packs were expensive, right? You're talking about, you know, $20 packs back in '96. And the odds of getting a refractor in a box, I think, came about 2 per box. I must have cracked, I don't know how many boxes, and I got a lot of refractors like this one here, right? For example, like I'm a big Jason Williams fan, so I have a lot of J. Will stuff, and it's more passion, right? But like this card, right, extremely off center, right, you know, right to left, you know, it only grades an 8.5. You know, I love the card, but I pulled this card as a kid or as a young guy out of a pack, right? And I bought tons of boxes, and I maybe got a base Kobe if I bought 2 boxes, but the idea of pulling a Kobe refractor just getting one was insanely difficult, let alone to get one with, you know, near perfect centering, perfect everything, perfect card is astronomically difficult. And you're talking about one of the greatest players to ever pick up a basketball. And this card is arguably not as valuable as a Luka RPA. And this is a guy who won 5 championships, 2 by himself, like arguably maybe one of the least talented teams to win a title against a great team. I think that when he was with Gasol and Odom, I mean, the stuff that Kobe did is just it's legendary on another. It's on another level. And for the value of that card, when I look at it in comparison to what some of this other stuff goes for, it makes absolutely no sense to me personally. Again, I'm coming from outside the hobby, and I get it. It's a jersey, it's an auto, but I mean, if that's really the case, I mean, you could, for less money, you could go buy an actual jersey that Luka wore in a game and have it signed, and it'd be less money. I mean, jersey auto doesn't mean anything. We're talking about sports cards. I mean, the Honus Wagner is a multi-million-dollar card. It has no auto, no jersey on it, right? The Mickey Mantle rookie in a 9 has no auto, no jersey on it. Is that card going to become less valuable over time because auto cards and jersey cards are so prevalent? I don't think so. That's not what you have to look at the hobby in historical context, just like coins and art is looked at. The reason that art is valuable is because a piece of art takes art and transcends it to another level. If you look at a guy, like Picasso, right, who brought a new form of art, with cubism and things like that to the market. He took art from here and he brought it to here. And looking at it today, it wouldn't look that revolutionary to somebody. But at the time, it was extremely revolutionary. And that's what this card was. This card brought, vintage, with the 86, 87 stuff that you had in the 80s to a new kind of card that was, extremely expensive, extremely, with the chrome finish and everything else, extremely high end. The refractor coating, it was the first sort of high-end set, right, in basketball. It was an iconic set because it changed kind of the way that basketball cards were made and the price points and the exclusivity and the way that they were delivered and the level of detail that went into them. So that set is important. That player is important, and it's extremely hard to get. So to me, that's what should create more of the value. Whereas I see a lot of the value in the hobby going towards some of this new stuff just because it's pop one of whatever, and it's got an auto and a jersey on it, all of a sudden, like, it's great, but that player hasn't, you're paying upfront value for something, and that's very dangerous, because you're buying championships that haven't been won. You're assuming that they're going to do things that are very difficult to do. For someone like Luka to even surpass someone like Dirk is going to be extremely difficult. What Dirk did in Dallas was amazing, beating that Miami team and being able to win a title there. And what he was able to do in his career. And Luka's got amazing talent. He's a really fun guy to watch. But when you're talking about real value in sports cards, I mean, to live up to that kind of value, you got to be on that Mount Rushmore at some point, and, so that's something there. And then another card here that I love, I mean, a lot of this, again, this is a 10, LeBron, just a Topps Chrome, PSA 10. I love this card because, I love the Kobe, right? And so Topps Chrome was just a set that I fell in love with as a kid. And I felt like, owning that LeBron and was kind of like, to me, Kobe was passing that torch to him. And so for me, like, owning that Topps Chrome card was sort of like, having some type of card that was similar to Kobe's card in a way. And for me, that's kind of like how I looked at it. It's just something I really like and believe in. Plus, I think the card is extremely hard to get compared to what the value was when I bought it. And so I think that's, still a great card to own.
As you've been in the hobby now for a year and a half, have you sort of ventured into more like unique pieces, or started to like figure out kind of more your niche and like what you enjoy outside of the ones you kind of came in wanting when you were a kid?
Yeah. I still buy a lot of stuff that I just like for fun, and I still, you know, I think that what I'm trying to get into now is more LeBron. So uh, looking at some of his auto stuff. I am looking at that, but I'm also just buying a lot of stuff that I like. So, I mean, a lot of the times, what I buy isn't necessarily like super high end or super valuable. Sometimes I just buy stuff that I just like, like I just bought this Elijah one the other day, and it's just an Elijah one, patch, from college that's signed. And I just think it's a cool card, and sometimes I just enjoy breaking boxes, because that's just fun. Like as a kid, I broke a bunch of optic this year. I know you like LeBron. So, I pulled this LeBron and a bunch of LeBron refractors and a bunch of cool optic stuff. Man, I got a bunch of it here. And, I just think that it's cool because when cards find you, like naturally, right? Like just opening up a pack and then it's somehow like that card finds you, and you like the card, and somehow you came across it naturally. There's something about that, that I think is fun, because it's like you remember that moment when you pulled that card from that pack and that adrenaline rush, and I'm a gambler, and I like to I like to gamble and do stuff like that. And it kind of started right with busting those packs. I mean, that
Hmm.
that rush that you get from it. Going into the hobby now, I am kind of looking to buy, some bigger items, and and I had a bunch of deals sort of in place and I did buy a lot of stuff recently. A lot of Kawhi stuff prior to the Corona kind of situation. I bought a lot of Kawhi RPAs. LeBron Ultimate deal that it didn't end up going through, but I'm probably going to end up getting an Ultimate at some point. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the deals at that time, right in this last few weeks prior to the Corona thing, it kind of caused a lot of problems. But so I did lose one card because of that. But I've been buying a lot of stuff that I still feel like has potential in some of the younger guys. I think Kawhi was a guy that I felt like was undervalued. I know the season's on pause, but kind of just going into the playoffs, I just kind of thought, like, when I look at what his RPAs cost versus some of these other guys, like Trae Young or Luka or guys like that, it didn't really add up to me, because I feel like, it's always upside downside when you look at an investment. And a guy like Kawhi, he's already proven himself as a a perennial force in the NBA. I mean, he's got 2 titles, 2 different teams, all defensive player, a guy who's gone up against the best and won, beat who people said was the unbeatable, right? The Golden State Warriors. And then obviously he's taken LeBron with the Spurs, and now he's positioned real well in LA, and I just feel like he's got nothing but upside, and his downside is very low given the price of his cards. I mean, how much lower can they be compared to what other stuff is? And so he was a guy that going into the playoffs, I thought was a good buy. And but I still think that LeBron has a lot of upside too, but I just think a lot of that upside is built into his value right now. When you look at some of the prices of his cards, that people are assuming that he's going to win at least 1 or 2 more titles in LA. And I get that assumption because, if I was betting on anybody to do it, it would be him. If I had to put a bet and say what's going to happen. But I think a lot of that value is built on the front end. And I think when you're buying cards and you're buying value built on the front end of stuff, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it, you're taking a risk, whereas it's not the same when you're buying guys like Kobe and Jordan, because, you're not, their value sort of is what it is. And you're not paying on, perceived future things that may or may not happen, right? Their careers are sort of wrapped up. So I think that that's all kind of interesting there, but yeah.
You kind of brought up coronavirus a little bit. I kind of wanted to jump into that a little bit more, especially from the like kind of business investing side. So how do you feel this is going to affect the market going forward? Is this just like a pause in the market and we'll kind of pick things back up? Is this like a
Yeah.
a several year
Yeah.
dip? Like what do you think we're looking at?
So I think that like every market right now, there's confusion because we don't really know how long this runway is going to be before we can take off, right? And that's what everybody's debating. Like how long of a runway is this? And even if we can take off, we're going to have to land again. And then in terms of a virus resurging and causing other problems before we can get a vaccine and whatnot. So I think that that's something that we all kind of have to think about. But with the card market, it seems like what people are doing is like in a lot of markets is just sort of waiting and seeing, right? Like there's been some deals, some transactions, hasn't really been on fire. There hasn't been a major dip except for in a lot of the stuff that was maybe people thought was inflated anyway. And it was a lot of people that were flipping and then maybe they don't want to hold stuff indefinitely. So they kind of dumped a lot of the stuff. And I don't want to say the shiny chrome, but that's what comes to mind when I think of that, right? The shiny chrome stuff, some of the new stuff. And, that's fine. But I think, when you look at the card market, it's interesting because all the capital in the world has to go somewhere. And when you have 0% interest rates, when you have a stock market where it's at right now with the sort of confusion around the value there, right, in the future there, you look at the real estate market. There's a lot of markets where people feel very insecure, right, in terms of where they want to put money, but money has to go somewhere, right? And generally speaking, I think that the card market is still undervalued, because of those things that we talked about before when I mentioned the size of the card market versus other collectible markets and how far behind this market is from catching up. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, it's not even, and if you look at the popularity with our generation, with this hobby, right, compared to coins and compared to art, you'd have to think, and a logical person would have to think that there's going to be a lot of recession within those markets because it doesn't really resonate with our demographic, which is the demographic that's going to have the capital, right? So you have to, it's only common sense to think that those have to shrink and it has to go somewhere, right? And there's still going to be people that want to collect. Obviously, the market's going to bounce back, but I do think that there's going to be some stagnation. I don't think that the market's going to collapse or, especially with the high-end stuff. But I do think that, there's going to be some stagnation until people can have some more clear vision of how long that runway is. And, when we can actually, take off and things will resume back to some resemblance of normal.
I mean, I've been kind of saying this for the last year or so in kind of preparation for what I thought may eventually happen with some sort of dip just because of the massive bull run we've been on for so long. But eventually, once something bad happens, the first thing people are going to dump is the ones that they can get back easily later or stuff that you can find on eBay any second. The stuff that the really rare high-end stuff is the one that people are going to hold tighter almost. And that kind of stuff, I'm not seeing any sort of dip in any of that stuff. And I think that's just kind of proving out what I believed before.
Right.
So.
And I think most of us believe that the market will rebound, it will correct, because what we've had here economically is something unprecedented in the sense that we had we had extremely strong economy, going into this. And what we've essentially does is had to put it on pause because of this virus. The fundamentals in the economy were there. The question is, what is the domino effect from this, and how bad is that domino effect? And is that going to be recoverable? And how and I have no doubt that it is, but the timeline that it's going to take to come back out of that is a little bit uncertain. But I tend to think that it will be relatively quickly, because if you look at something like restaurants or any business like Disney or something like that, right? When people feel comfortable and the economy's really opened up again, they should come back, maybe not to 100%, because again, there's going to be a lot of social implications from this virus that are going to keep people from wanting to go out as much, and they may change their habits. So they may see Disney World may see 60% or 70% or the volume that they saw prior to that, given that, right? But they'll offer deals and they'll do things to try to incentivize people, and over time, when people feel more comfortable, it'll return back to normal. Same thing with air travel and everything else. The timeline for that's uncertain, but I'm certain that it will happen. And I think that, this is a buying opportunity, in my opinion, because I feel like if you have a stretch of, 2 or 3 years where there's nothing fundamentally wrong, right, with the economy, Instead, you have a temporary event that's putting it on pause that's going to cause and have repercussions. There's no doubt about that. But the idea that like for example, like you have a bunch of people laid off from the restaurant industry, or like I said, Disney World, well, it's because they're not operating. But when they're operating again, of course, they're going to hire people, and those people will go back to work, and so on and so forth, and people will return, and we will get through this. We will live on. But when everybody is, looking for value in life, usually it comes from situations like this when, there's these drastic pullbacks, in capital, like in the stock market, for example, or maybe possibly it'll happen in cards to some extent. But 2-3 years down the line, people are going to want those commodities again, so.
Yeah, it's almost crazy to talk about buying right now, but just because of all the uncertainty and kind of what's going on, and people focus more on their home life and their families and stuff, it's crazy to think about. But you're right, like because of that, no one else is buying, so you can kind of take advantage of that.
Well, it's
I
like
want to,
like you when others
yeah,
are fearful, you're supposed to be greedy, right? And
right,
I always think about it like, when everybody's running out of the burning building, usually the ones that are willing to go in the burning building are the ones that are that get the most value. Because
right,
whenever you get value, it's because someone's selling something for less than it's truly worth because of emotions. And that's when you get value. And so when you get a 30-40% drop in a stock, for example, like Berkshire Hathaway, which is the breakup value for that stock is worth more than the price it's currently at, right? Like they have 135 billion in cash and their stake in Apple. If you broke everything up, it'd be worth as much as the stock. So you're buying the stock at cost, for example, in this example. Well, everybody's dumping it because they're pulling money out of the market because they're scared, because they're thinking the market's unstable and everything else. But they're not looking at, the long-term picture. They're acting out of emotion and out of fear and out of the sense that they don't know where the bottom is, but they're devaluing things that maybe they're not really long-term less valuable. And so I think that when that happens, that's when people end up, capitalizing the most. I mean, it happened in 2008, when everything was on sale. That's when people that bought things ended up making tremendous amounts of money, whether it had been in real estate or whether it had been in stocks, right? I mean, that's where, those types of things happen. So, I mean, I definitely think that applies to every market.
sure.
Yeah.
I want to jump to the next topic, which is grading, because you take grading seriously. You take it into account when you're buying. It's important, but you also kind of touched on it where you're really going past the 10 and you're looking at the card itself.
Yeah.
So how much of the actual grade do you take into account versus like your own eye appeal, and what is that? How does that factor in?
Yeah. When I first got back into the hobby, again, I was a complete outsider, and I looked at it like, it was very confusing, black labels, and I see one 10 and another 10 didn't look the same to me. I'm like, how could this be right? What I wanted to know was, if I crack this card open and I resubmit it, is it going to get a 10? And that, when I found out the answer, right, to that question, it really bothered me, because at the end of the day, we're spending a lot of money on this stuff, right? We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, right? Or millions of some people, right? And the grading process is not an exact science, and I realize that there's a very much a political element to it. In theory, if a card's a 10, I should be able to crack it and I should be able to submit it back and get the same grade. But obviously, we know that that's not the case, right? And so, given that, I feel very insecure about trusting the label. I have to trust my own, read of the card, and I have to look at the card that I'm buying. And not all 10s are equal, not all 9s are equal, not all anything is equal. It's very much up to you to do your research. And so, for example, like on a condition sensitive set, like the 86, 87 Fleer, I mean, you have to know that they're all 90% of the cards, or 95% of the cards that you pull out of a brand new pack are going to be off center, right? Like the most, I don't know what percent, 40% are going to have print dots, so the whole set is very condition sensitive, and so you have to take that into account, right, when you're looking at what a 10 is, because finding a perfect card in a set that that's printed that poorly is going to be not really reasonable, right? If you were to go today and pull, like an optic or something, right, like right out, you would expect that I would have a higher expectation of the centering, have a higher expectation of the surface, and not to have surface flaws and things like that. So I can understand why you'd be much harder on this being a 10 versus something like this, right? It makes sense. So you have to take that into account, and then you kind of have to just look at a lot of cards, and you have to see, what the, if you look at 15 or 20 or 30 examples of a 10, and you kind of see kind of where the variation is, and get an idea of what you think a 10 is, not what you think PSA thinks it is, and whatnot. Because I think that we've seen with these companies that over the years, if you look at all the decades that they've been grading that card, and if for example, like let's say in the 90s, let's say their grading was more lax, and they tend a lot of cards that maybe shouldn't be 10s, or and then now they're on the other side of the spectrum. It doesn't change what a 10 is. A 10 is of that issue, and you look at that whole population, what card really truly exemplifies a 10, and that's what I would want to buy. Like, I wouldn't want to buy something just because it has that number on the label. I'd want the card to look the part too.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in for new collectors, right? Because you think like, oh, just buy the 10. That's the easy thing to do, but there's a lot more to it, right? There's a lot more research and time and effort has to go into it.
Yeah, and it's complicated too. And I'll bring this up, like when we look at that, like that Topps Chrome, like the Kobe, like the eye appeal on that card to me matters a lot, because like when I look at it, like I don't want to see a card that's got any green on it, but I think that creates a subcategory like on the card that gives it even more exclusivity. Like if you have one that has perfect color, to me that card should carry like a premium, just because, I mean, are they all going to turn green eventually? Maybe, I don't know, but I think that one that has perfect color to me is even adds another level of rarity to the card. If you're able to find one that like a PSA 10 with perfect color, I mean, to me that's should carry huge value. And if you're able to find a Jordan that has truly 50-50 centering, no print dots, perfect edges, perfect corners, eggshell color on the back, I mean, then that's not your average 10, and that should carry a premium. Just because I feel like, who wants to buy a 10 that's off center? Who wants to buy a 10 with a print dot? I don't, but maybe other people don't mind. And to me, like, I don't really understand that, because then they're just buying the label, if you don't care about those things, so.
I want to go back to the kind of the market cap of cards versus coins, because I haven't really discussed that with anyone other than Brent from PWCC, and I've always thought that was interesting because within cards we talk about which ones are overpriced, which ones are underpriced, but overall, like, the thing that would make the biggest impact is just like a market cap raise of all cards in general.
That's right.
So what as a hobby needs to happen in order for that cap to raise, in terms of infrastructure or tools or people and their actions within the market? Like, what do you think are like the different things that can happen there?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a complicated answer, but I'll start. I think the first thing is that, it's more money in, right? Like, we're playing in a pond, okay? And there's oceans out there of investments, the stock market, the equities market. Our pond is small, it's like this. And if you look at the coins market, it's maybe like this, and the art market's like that. And, the equities market's like the Pacific Ocean or something, right? So it's how would more capital come into the space, and do you think more capital is going to come into the space? And that would create, right, the biggest influx in value, for the hobby. And I think that, given the nature of the hobby and the things we've talked about, and like what makes it appealing, I think that that's reasonable to anticipate that that's going to happen. And I think that in order for people to feel comfortable in the space, the things like the grading and stuff like that, they need to be able to have faith in those areas. And I think that, you know, the political elements that exist in grading that we've discussed right now, like, in other words, like a Ricky Henderson, like PSA 10, for example, right? Like that card, they don't 10 any Ricky Henderson PSA 10. I mean, you could get 500 like really, really great examples that look like, just like 10s that you see, you know, and you submit them all. And I've heard of people that have done this and they won't 10 one of them, you know. You know, there's a political element that exists here. And I think that has to stop. You know, I think that it needs to be scientific, not political. I don't know if that means, you know, injecting software and when you talk about centering, I mean, why wouldn't it be just an exact measurement using that? I mean, why wouldn't you scan the card and have software analyze it and it's totally unbiased, you know, like a computer system, right? And giving it that reading. Now those things, I can understand why they're a long way out, because to customize something like that, given that every set and every issue is different, like I said, some sets are way more condition sensitive. So to get a 10 and, you know, in one card versus another card, I get that. But we can't just deny that there's a political element to grading. And, you know, that I think that as somebody coming into the hobby as a new person, that was a little bit disarming to me. And so making the grading process more transparent, more scientific, more dependable and consistent. I mean, I should be able to crack a 10, resubmit it and get another 10. Why shouldn't I be able to do that? You know, why is a grade the luck of the draw? I mean, I think that most people in the hobby, you know, if they had a 10 and you said, hey, crack this 10 and submit it back to PSA, they would be like, are you nuts? There's no way I'm going to do that, right? Like, I was lucky to get this grade, and I don't think what if I don't get the grade? Why wouldn't you get the grade? The card should be a 10. You know, it shouldn't be luck that you got a 10, you know? And so that right there is very scary to people, because we're paying based on those numbers. So if somebody coming outside the hobby doesn't feel consistent, I'll give you another example. If you look at the mortgage crisis back in 2008, what really caused the mortgage crisis? It was the fact that the bond ratings were not accurate, right? So like these mortgage-backed securities and stuff that got AAA ratings and stuff like that, right? Those AAA ratings were fraudulent because of the way they packaged these mortgages together, and they were basically the sole purchaser from the ratings companies. So the ratings companies were basically dependent on them as their major client. So they gave them the ratings that they wanted, and they were able to manipulate the system, and that worked out. And that perpetuated and really caused a lot of those problems. Now, if they weren't able to circumvent that process and get that secure rating on those mortgage-backed securities, then maybe the economic crisis wouldn't happen. People have to have confidence in those AAA ratings. They have to have confidence in these labels. And I'm going to tell you right now, as somebody coming new back into the hobby, I have no confidence. I don't have confidence in those labels. I trust my own assessment of the cards, you know? And that is a major problem, okay? The other thing that I think that is a barrier to more capital coming into the space, I'm talking about like big money, right, is the auction houses and the auction process. You know, I think that, you know, there's things that have happened in the space that we see become commonplace, like bid shilling. We've had, examples of trimming and stuff like that that are a minority of situations. You know, this is not the majority. This is not the, the status quo or whatever. I don't think but it does create a barrier to entry in the sense that people have some fear about the legitimacy of the process, you know, and we have to, as part of this hobby, we have to make sure that the process is legitimate so that people can count on these values being accurate, because again, we're basing the value on these cards on comps, and those comps have to be real, you know, and these auction houses have a tremendous responsibility for the health of the hobby. And I think that I don't think they're doing, I'm not going to point fingers and say they're doing a bad job. I'm just kind of pointing out that I think it's really paramount that they, in order for the hobby to maintain credibility, that they have to enforce it in a way that, that makes sure that that comps are legitimate and that there's no funny business like happening in the hobby, which I think they're trying to do. But I think that that's really important. And I think what you're trying to do, education, like educating people on the hobby. I mean, I think all of us that are in this hobby that care about it have to do our part to try to spread awareness of the hobby, and people that are interested in it, we have to help them understand it. I've personally brought a lot of people into the hobby because I talk about it a lot, because I'm passionate about it a lot. And I post this stuff on my own, like, personal Instagram. I don't have a special Instagram for cards because I really am more interested in people that I know in my small circle being exposed to it than people that are already in the hobby. See,
Yeah.
I look at it another way. I don't
Yeah.
look at it like I want to go create a private Instagram and just appeal to people inside of my little pond that are playing in this game. I want to show this to people outside that have no idea this pond even exists, and saying, hey, this is something kind of cool over here. And there's actually a lot of, like, really neat things going on. And here's why. Because at face value, your average person most people don't even know that this is something that people do to the extent that it's done, right?
Right.
And so I kind of look at it as, like, if I bring a few few new people into the hobby, right, then I kind of feel like I'm doing something, and I'm not trying to recruit people or anything like that. I just share what I'm doing, and when they ask, I'm happy to, like, talk about it more. And what you've done with with how to collect and all that stuff, I mean, I really admire that, because what you're doing is you're providing a fundamental resource for people to get educated. So if they want to pursue this, or they want to dip their toe in it, you're giving them sort of a blueprint for how they can execute it, right, in a way that makes sense. And they need that, because you know, it's a complicated thing to sort of work out. And then, like, even like guys like Gary Vee said, anything you want to do, you need to put 40 hours in. And I'm of that philosophy too. I mean, you really need to put in time to understand something. But what you're trying to do is help circumvent that, and give people, a roadmap, so they're not left on their own to sort of figure this out, because it can be a little overwhelming, right? When you're looking at, well, PSA, this other SCG, BGS, what is all this stuff, right? Like, what is this? And so I think that, the hobby has to do a better job of that. And people need to feel like this has a commodity element to it, just like art. And what does Sotheby's do for art, right? They tried to legitimize art, and they tried to legitimize that process. And they are more concerned with that than they are with, their own quarter to quarter earnings, because they know that long term, the legitimacy of the art market is what really matters. And I think that these auction houses need to really do their part too, and which I think that they are. I mean, I think the stuff that's they're doing at PWCC is amazing. I mean, I think the education piece of it, the vault, the a lot of the stuff that they're doing there, I really like those guys. And I think it's great, but I think that there's still a lot to be done. Because I think what we all want is that pond to get bigger, and I think we want more people in the space. Just because I feel like, I feel very passionately that, like I said, compared to other collectibles markets, this is, should be on a par, if not bigger than some of them, and in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure.
I really like the macro thoughts that you have towards the hobby, because, like you said, guys like myself, or people that have been in it a little bit longer, we kind of, we get in our own little lane, right? We have our Instagram, and we kind of know what we know. But in order to really step back and see the macro of the hobby, it's very difficult to do. So to have people that come in new and kind of point out what's bad and what needs improvement, it's really valuable to us. And so I really appreciate the time you've spent, walking us through that and giving us your perspective. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, when you think about what cards are, right, they're supposed to be stocks in players, right? And in my opinion, like, that's the way I always looked at it, right? You're buying a stock, and if you want people to take the card market seriously, they have to really believe that stock they're buying is the stock, and that, like I said, that the grade, that the card, the value, that what they're paying for it is literally like, if I want to buy stock in Luca, this is the stock to get, or if I want to buy stock in Jordan, this is the stock. Like, this is what I'm buying, and I'm, this is the card. And I think that that's confusing to people. Like, they may want it. They come into the hobby like, yeah, I think LeBron is awesome, and I want to invest in LeBron because I think he's going to be, at the end of the day, the greatest to ever play the game. But what do I buy? What do I buy, and why? And of course, that's the trick question, right? That we're all trying to figure out. And that's not easy to answer, but I think that that's the fun in it. But at the same time, you have to have um, some more transparency into the legitimacy of things, and you have to have confidence in the grade, confidence in the comps, and those types of things to feel you know uh, secure about those purchases. Guys that have been in this for a long time, I mean, they're very shrewd, and they kind of know how to see the gray, and it's really fascinating too when you come in the hobby, and you kind of learn the tricks of the trade and how they're able to point out, and they're not looking at it black and white. I mean, they're totally seeing all the gray there, and that's not, so, but you don't see that, right? And until you're in it for a while. But I would love to see more people come into the hobby for all the reasons we talked about before. And I think that, but I think we have to do our part, to do that, just like anything. And I think that I do believe that we're still in the infancy here, just given the market sizes that I think we've talked about a lot. But at the end of the day, I mean, again, I don't want to get too much into making this about business and making money and all those different things. I mean, I think we all essentially do this because we love doing it, and we love to collect. I just think that, a lot of us too are putting a lot of money into this hobby, and we want to see the hobby grow, right? And so I think that's how it would be done.
Some stuff, man. Another thing that I get asked a lot is about like, what boxes do I buy? And you sent me a really cool tip. So why don't you share your tip on like what you're looking for when you're buying boxes? Because I get that question so much. Like, what product do I buy? Where do I buy the boxes? Like, what's your tip?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, as someone who's again coming from back into the hobby, relatively new, haven't gotten, I've been playing with boxes recently because of the fun aspect. Because again, I think if we're not cracking packs, okay, if we're not cracking packs in this hobby, what are we doing? I mean, that's what I mean. This is not about like just buying slabs, and from one guy from the other and stuff. I mean, the fun in this thing was being a kid and opening up a pack, and seeing what you get and that adrenaline rush. And it's sad to me that that like in a lot of these cities we have very few sports cards shops left, and a lot of it's online because going into, like, we have one left in Houston, going in there and watching someone crack a box open or opening one, and everybody coming and kind of watching and seeing what they get, and that rush that you get when you come home and you open one, or I mean, that's part of the fun in the hobby. So I wanted to get back in it for that reason, right? Not from a financial standpoint or anything else, but cracking packs, and when I looked at it, again, I think that, a lot of the problem with buying boxes, again, it goes back to the legitimacy of the hobby and trying to protect that. When you look at the actual MSRPs or map values, they are pretty accurate if they sold at that, right? So if I could go buy a box of National Treasures at the actual map price, I'd be thrilled, because I think that I can buy that box at that value. I can crack it open and probably get close to breaking even, or maybe not. Maybe I lose half my money, but I really have fun and I get a chance at landing a huge card. But the problem is you have Panini dominating the space, and they're choosing and picking like several people that they can sell to, and then those people have a list, right, that they're choosing that you have to be at the top of, and they're going to, of course, to be at the top of that list, you would have been buying for them for years and spending a lot of money, or perhaps there's other things that are going on, I don't know, to get at the top of that list. It could be like there's a kickback to the person, or I don't really know. But it's very difficult. Like, we can't buy a box of National Treasures, right, for the actual MAP price. So instead of, I'm just using numbers here. I'm not throwing them out because they're accurate, but let's say the MAP price on a box is $900 or $700 or whatever it is. If the actual price you can get the box at is $3,000, you can't open it. It's too much of a risk unless you just want to, like, you know, really, really, gamble. And then you're probably going to lose money, like, most of the time. Like, you're going to lose a lot of money. So you're asking most people to enjoy the hobby and the thing that's the most fun and what I think is the smartest thing to be buying. Like, if you're, for example, like with National Treasures, and they got to take this big L to enjoy themselves. It'd be one thing if it's a small loss, but I'm talking about a massive loss, right? Like, you can go buy a box of National Treasures, spend $3,000, and you get nothing. You just lose $3,000 to they're taking away a lot of that, right, from the hobby, because there's a political process to getting access to the products, and because there was such a huge demand, they don't care, and because they'll sell it, and then so that's one problem I saw, right, coming from outside. And a lot of people I talk to in the hobby, they say, "Listen, man, this is just standard. This is the way it is," But coming from outside, again, you see something like this and you say, well, that may be the way it is, but that's not the way it should be, And the other thing that I see is that, I have a lot of trepidation about buying a box online, just given the fact that, and I don't know how much truth there is to this, but if I buy a whole case, right, which a lot of people do, they start breaking the case and they get these huge hits, right? Like, let's say they get like a Mahomes, RPA or something like that in a case, right? Like, right off the bat. Well, they're not going to open the rest of the case probably.
Yep.
And then they're going to sell the rest of the case online, and then you're buying the leftovers from a case that already had the Mahomes RPA. Now, Panini or whoever, they'll tell you, like, that doesn't matter. There could be another Mahomes in the box. And okay, maybe that's the case, but I would probably say that I would say that's probably not, right? I don't want to. So you don't want to get the leftovers. So so that, again, it goes back to, like, having access to a fair system. And I think that providing that, like, into the hobby, it lies within Panini and these makers, right, to give people more access and more fairness, and, like, I come from e-commerce, right? So when we have exclusivity agreements with people on products, we're not allowed to allow other people to sell for more money than what our MAP price is. We have strict MAP enforcement. Like, Amazon has that too. They don't always obey it, but if we sell to Amazon, they're not supposed to sell at the price higher than what our MAP price is, because we have to protect that price point and make that product accessible. That's not happening in this hobby, right? There's a limited access to the product. And for the average consumer like me coming back into the hobby, if I want to get in hold of it, I have to pay an exorbitant amount of money for it. And I'm going to have to be willing to most likely lose money to enjoy cracking open boxes that I want to crack open, losing lots of money. I'll accept losing some money. I'll accept gambling a little bit, right? But losing $2,000-3,000 to try to pull a card, I don't know. I mean, I think I should be able to maybe lose to get something back, right? That would offset that. But I think that at the price points that a lot of this stuff is at, it causes me not to want to buy it.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of short-term outlook from some of these companies, and in order to get that, like, long-term market cap raise, we need to be more mindful about the entire market and not just, like, one singular cash grab up front.
Absolutely.
And I think,
let's learn from
that's
mistakes in the
yeah.
past. I mean, the market crash in the wax era, the junk wax era. I mean, that's an extreme example because that's not exactly what's happening today. It's a different thing. But again, it goes back to the powers that be that are in control of this hobby, starting with Panini, like, within basketball, to the graders, to the auction houses. These guys have a tremendous responsibility to ensure that that this hobby is protected, and I think that it's in their own interest,
Totally.
like, don't, why would you, step over $1 to pick up a penny, and so I think that's not smart, and it does concern me, as someone coming from outside the hobby, seeing these types of things, unfold. So and I think that like there's a lot of, but what I think though on a positive note is I think there's so much room for innovation in this hobby, and that's what gets me excited. I'm kind of coming into it now as a collector and enjoying it, but I'm sort of seeing all of these areas that we could develop and improve upon, through innovation, right? And I'm seeing, like what I mentioned, like we talked about, like software grading before, better connecting with buyers and sellers, better formats for that, right? I mean, I'm thinking out loud here, but escrow for cards, for example, right? Like could become a thing, right? There's just so many areas of innovation that we could do here, as a hobby, and I think that the more of those things that become commonplace, we need to build an infrastructure that can support this hobby over time, and I think that that's going to happen, and I'm looking forward to seeing that because I really believe that there's so many great opportunities here, to do that. And I think that like guys like StockX, right, that came into the space, and their idea was to sort of create, right, a store and a process where people felt comfortable coming in and buying, right, like standardized cards, that they could create this sort of shopping system for the hobby, because like I said, we don't have sports card stores anymore. eBay is, there's a lot of trepidation that new people have when they're coming on there and trying to play there. So having that credibility of someone like StockX saying like, here's an assortment, a catalog of cards, and this is kind of your standard thing, and you can just go shopping, you could buy that. The problem is, like, again, in our hobby, a 10 is not a 10, right?
Yep.
And so having a stock image of a card, we know as collectors that doesn't really fly, right? Like we want to see what we're buying, and so that's very important. It's something that people outside the hobby, when you're first coming in, they're like, okay, well, that's a 10, so a 10 is a 10, right? And we're like, no, that's not really how it is. And so there, I think we have a long way to go in terms of innovation, and connecting buyers and sellers, having a more scientific grading process, having reliable comp data, which isn't that far from being there, but I think that there's still some areas there to improve. And then just like having more transparency, I think, into the market, and as a whole in a lot of areas.
There's also a lot we can do as individuals, right? Like stop buying boxes for $3,000. That would get them to stop selling it for $3,000.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that like, a lot of the guys, they look at it like, yeah, I mean, I may lose money on a box at 3,000, but eventually I'm going to hit that big card and it's going to pay for everything. Right. And, I know a lot of guys that break, cases and whatever, and eventually they get these huge hits, and it kind of makes up for all that and then some. But I think that like at the end of the day, make this we want to make this whole hobby a smart decision for people, because we want to bring more people into the hobby.
Yep.
And we don't want people to have to become extreme experts on how to circumvent the system in order to be able to play in it.
Yep.
And I think that like, we want to create more access and more favorable situations so that we can draw more people into the hobby, and more security, for lack of a better word, right? For those other things that we're kind of talking about. So, because the fun in the hobby is opening packs. It's getting that adrenaline rush of like, getting a big card, and people need to know and have access to those things, and to bring that fun back into the hobby. And then they need to have security if they're going to invest serious money in it, right? They need to have security that this process and everything is is very dependable, I think so. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I think that there's just nothing but growth. I mean, I think there's so much opportunity for the value in this hobby, and I really believe in that, or I wouldn't be kind of planning on investing a lot more money into it, in the now and in the near future. I'm just pointing out some of the things I think we can improve upon. That's all, because I want other people to come into the space, and I've seen, like, from my own group, my own social group, I've brought in so many people because they see, like, the value, and they see the merit in these arguments that I'm making, right? Like, and it's not BS, and I really believe in it. I would much rather own um, a Michael Jordan PSA 10 rookie card than I would a piece of art. I enjoy it more, and I honestly believe that people care more about. We're a sports obsessed society. I mean, there's no getting around that, right? I mean, we grew up in a 24-hour, I mean, news, sports center, news coverage, nonstop sports cycle from pretty much our infancy until our adulthood. I mean, we go from one sport to the other, to the highlights, to the fantasy football, to the I mean, it's just a sports obsessed culture. We There's no way that that's going away. It's ingrained in us. And people want to invest in what they know. That's why they play fantasy football. That's why sports betting is so popular. And it's the reason why, like, this is our art. I mean, there's no, I mean, to me, it seems like to me seems very common sense to me. And so I feel like the hobby, because of those reasons, it has so much potential. But what we have to protect the credibility of the hobby to ensure that we don't mess it up, and that's the only reason I'm pointing out these things. Not to critique it or say it's bad. It's because I care about it and I want to see the hobby do well. And I don't want to see the hobby shoot itself in the foot like it did in the 90s.
Yeah.
We should have learned. We have to learn from those mistakes. And I don't. It's not to say that I don't think that the auction houses and everybody's not doing that. I think they're trying to do their best job, but I think that as collectors, we have to do our part too. So
I'm going to send this interview off to the CEO of all these companies and teach him a few things. I think this was extremely valuable information, so I appreciate all your time today, and hopefully people pulled some valuable stuff from it.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. I love talking about it, the hobby, and just I love the show, so I'm happy to be part of it, and just enjoy collecting and keep making friends in the space. And
Totally.
I don't know if there's going to be a nationals this year, but hope to see you there if there is. And we'll have to see. It's interesting times right now. I mean, I've never had a league paused before, so I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it'll be interesting. Do you think that, just before we go, I was going to ask you, do you think, being a big LeBron fan, do you feel like if there isn't a season, he's being robbed of a title, or do you feel a little bit like burned on that in a sense?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I mean, obviously, like, as a LeBron fan, what we're chasing is, like, to get closer to Michael.
Right.
And a lost season is kind of hurting that. And also, like, he's losing points towards his all-time scoring record. Like, there's a lot of, I mean, you can see it in his face, like, on his live Instagram. He's just, like, he's really upset about it. And there's, like, rumors he wants to retire. He's so upset, and, like, he's not going to play if there's not fans. He's trying to grapple with the fact that, like, things are being taken from him and he has no control. So as a fan, it's very frustrating, obviously.
It is. I mean, and you don't want to, even if they were to do some type of a kind of a half-assed playoffs or whatever, there may be an asterisk championship there, and, like, he still loses, like you said, all the scoring. Out of everybody, he's really the one damaged the most by all of this. If Kevin Durant was, like, fully healthy, like, you could argue him too, but I mean, but he's really the one that's, because he's been setting himself up for this season, and being, what is he, 36? 36 now?
35, yeah, 36.
35. Okay, going on, I guess, 35. He'll be 36 next year. So, I mean, he's, like, still in that prime year. I think, what did Jordan win his last title at 36? Something like that. So, he's still in that prime, and he's obviously probably got 2 or 3 years more in his prime than most people, just given his level of conditioning. But I feel like, yeah, I mean, he's really been the one that's his legacy has been the most affected by this. And it's unfortunate because a generational athlete like that. I mean, we all want to see him give a fair shot, right, at history,
Yeah.
and but I think that he's still LeBron no matter what, and I still think there's titles in his future. But yeah, I know as a big LeBron fan, I was just curious how you were how that was sitting with you. But
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, like we all hope this thing goes away, and we see some improvements. We see some of the cases come down. We see the vaccine progress, and things get back to normal. I think that's what we're all hoping for soon. So appreciate the time, Chase. We're gonna
yeah,
wrap it up and talk soon, man.
yeah. Take care, guys. See you.